How you doing? Lynn back again, and I'd like to do a little short video, just to um, maybe try to compact what I'm trying to tell about Paul and um, him being the two witnesses. It's more than that, and that understanding how Paul's gospel is written is kind of what I've come to understand, is that the first part of Paul's gospel, Romans and First Corinthians, is the foundation of faith. If you never read Second Corinthians and the rest of the books, you wouldn't have a sense of, you could lose your salvation. If you only read, or if you were only in Romans and First Corinthians, it's very, definitely is the foundation of our faith. But something happens, and I think it's all about rightly dividing the word of truth, is that there's something that happens no longer, when the mystery happens, no longer are we in that time frame of those called to be saints that Paul is ministering to. Now we've come into another time zone, and this time is when the saints have returned, and the beginning of each letter kind of tells who's there, and the saints are there, beyond the mystery. They call them saints in light. Several different references to these that have come back. 2 Corinthians 1 and 10 tells us that they have been delivered from so great a death. So, and we, 1 Corinthians 16, we're taking up a collection for these saints, because they've showed up, and then everything changes from there. Once you get into 2 Corinthians, then you read the passage. Now the promises are yes and amen. If this would have read, if that passage would have been in 1 Corinthians, it would have destroyed my theory, but it's not. It's right where it needs to be. Just as another passage, today is the day of salvation. It's on the other side of the mystery. The saints have come and they've brought salvation with them. This is what Paul's gospel is all about. And somehow or another, we've kind of meshed it all together and said that 1 Corinthians 15 is the rapture. But, it doesn't say anything about the rapture there at all. It just says the dead men rise, and it says that we, I guess, must put on, immortality. Like it's something we have to obtain somehow. Or I kind of thought maybe it was that, the dead men come forth for the harvest, and then they're waiting on the harvest to be ready. If you're already ready for being harvested, you know, uh, maybe right away you get harvested in. And I think the place that we go is Mount Zion. When we're harvested, we go to Mount Zion to learn how to walk a straight path, which, you know, we're lame, blind. We need to know how to walk a straight path. I don't think any of us can say that we know how to do that as of yet. I mean, we have the word to tell us how to do it, but can we actually pull it off? And I think that is our dilemma: is we can't pull it off. We may know it, and we may intend on doing it that way, but then we always fall short. So that's what it's all about. What I'm talking about is, if the dead men don't rise, as Paul says, then Christ didn't rise from the dead. So this is an event that we should be looking for, the dead men to rise. Now, by Paul's own words, he's tarrying till Pentecost, because there's a great door and effectual opening to him. And so, like, what does this effectual mean? Well, the same effectual working is working in Peter. But what you find is in the progression. Paul is warning that if he come again, he will not spare. And then he shows up in Galatians, and he's there because they've departed the faith. I mean, he says that I marvel how soon you remove from the grace of God into another gospel. What they're doing is they're moving down. They've moved away from faith because they've gone back to the law. That's exactly what Paul is talking about in Galatians. Was you transition on, we start seeing these phrases. If you continue in the faith, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. These are people who've come into the faith apparently during this time frame, and now they just need to hang on until the harvest. Well, you get on down to Thessalonians, where the rapture is talked about, and 1 Thessalonians 4. Well, one of the things I noticed was there wasn't no saints there that is mentioned in the very first chapter 1, where it's always mentioned. There was no saints there. But as another anomaly was that apparently, in chapter 5, after they, claim peace and safety, Paul says, but you're not ignorant of that day. You're sons of the day, sons of the light. So I think the transformation process must have happened. The saints in light, the glorious gospel that's with them, the inheritance has made its way even into those that are alive and remain when the rapture happens. Even they that are there are aware, and they're sons of the day, sons of the light. Yeah, is there going to be tribulation for some of them? Maybe so. But I think it kind of shows a progression that, somehow comes out at the rapture. Maybe that's what James is talking about. James was charged to preach to the Jews, as was Peter and John. But if you ever noticed, in the Gospels, it's always, they're referred to Peter, James, John. Peter, James, John went up on the mountain with Jesus and he transformed. So all through the Gospels, it's Peter, James, and John. But Paul actually changes that, that order. And then the books, after they come after Hebrews and all, they're in that order and that Paul put on them. But what does James say? In James 2 and 5, hearken, my brother, hath not God chosen the poor, the rich in faith, what do you say? Those called by his name and heirs of the kingdom who love him. It's like James is saying they're gone. He took them, he chose them, and they're gone. And now, you got to understand that you got to bring forth a fruit worthy of repentance. And, if you follow Luke's, John the Baptist, what he was talking about was, his basic job was to bring the wisdom of the just to the disobedient. The wisdom of the just is Lord, have mercy on me because I'm a sinner, not boasting in your righteousness before the Lord. That's what this is all about, is, back to what is spoken about, in Ephesians, that, it's by faith, not by works. So this is my whole message, kind of in the shortest little nutshell I can give it to you. Why this haven't been discussed, I don't know. But clearly, Paul is telling that these faithful believers are quickened. The Lord has quickened them, which harkens to the last Adam. He's somehow Paul has privy information from the last Adam that, hey, these faithful have been quickened. But Paul says in Galatians, Christ liveth in me, and so, and if Paul comes again, he will not spare. Christ has to remove the chaff, and the leadership is the problem. That's why Hymenaeus and Alexander were delivered up to Satan, because they had made shipwreck the faith. This is it. This is the message, Paul's gospel is the harvest of the church. Paul says it in so many different ways, and And I think the doctrines of demons have somehow tried to combine it all into one big mash and say 1 Corinthians 15's the rapture and everybody's gone, and then, you know, the world's left shaking their head. I think it's more subtle than that. You know, I think it's going to happen, and maybe, well, definitely the Jews won't know what's going on. But you know, this understanding that I have, it flows right into the Gospels perfectly. I've got some differences of opinion of certain things, like Luke, 13, and you know, I got, maybe that's further down into the tribulation was my other thought. Maybe that's 3 years into the Great Tribulation. It could be either or, but I think maybe that's what it is. But at any rate, Christ is coming again, you know, by what I can tell, in the form of a servant, Paul. And we've always, you know, Christ, when he came, he didn't come as a servant. He come as, you know, we know, born of the Virgin, God with us, Emmanuel. He was God. He was not in the form of a servant. I mean, when you change forms and go into another form, you're not recognized. We know that from the account of the Emmaus Road. You know, that it says that he took another form. He took the form of another to conceal their eyes from who he was, and he's just walking and talking with them. In the end, he revealed himself. So he changed his forms. He can do that. Hebrews 1:1 tells us exactly that. Melchizedek is an example of Christ doing that. So we have every reason to believe he would do it again. And then, you know, Hebrews looks like Paul wrote it, you know. So the question is always who wrote Hebrews. I think that's the wrong question. The right question is who wrote Paul's gospel. It says it right in the beginning. You know, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. God wrote it. God wrote all of it. And understanding the gospels, that some of the four gospels, how their prophetic, you know, nature, it's there. It's understanding how to read it, which is like I've said before, we need to learn, you know, to read with, and Paul should be real easy because he says he uses great plainness of speech. Everything before the mystery is future tense, and then once you get into 2 Corinthians, then it becomes the key moments are past tense, as like Paul is telling the story in real time. The mystery happens, take up a collection for the saints, and here's how we got here, because God delivered us from so great a death. And I believe it's 6 and 9 of 2 Corinthians, he said, you know, unknown, yet well known, dying, yet we live. So he said, and it goes on to talk about how death worketh in us and life in you. So they died and they come back to life, and now they're ministering, and they're harvesting the fruit on the vine. And that's my whole story, guys. I hope somebody will take the time to listen to this, and please comment. God bless you. I love all of you. Pray for me. I'll pray for you.